All right, everybody. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk mostly about um, how we can push our routing protocols to be hierarchical and what that means. And we'll talk a little bit about IPv6 at the end, mostly because it's in our chapter. Again, we're using the Systems Approach Computer Networks book by Peterson and Davey, which you can find online. And I talk about this in chapter 4 in terms of advanced internet networking. So let's get started. One of the main features here of this internet networking is how do we get information, say like from Stanford over here to UNL? And so when you have a tree that describes the internet, like this is a picture of what the internet might have looked like in the 90s. It's pretty straightforward, the path that this should take. But one thing that you'll notice is that it really looks like there are these independent networks that exist along this route, right? Your ISP, your school's internet, like exists here. All of those kind of form an autonomous unit that acts on its own. And so what we need to do is really come up with some routing algorithm that allows kind of each of these independent companies or universities or internets or networks to make their own decisions about what makes sense for them. And that could be an economic reason, or it could be a bunch of other reasons too. So that is why we need to talk about hierarchical routing techniques, and routing kind of not just as like I have the internet and I need to route across the internet, but what does that look like in actual practice? And one of the things that we saw in our routing video last time is that things like RIP might only have an available width of their internet of 15 units or 16 units, because 16 was the measure of infinity. So what does that look like? So one thing that you might do is break up your internet into areas, and that's kind of the OSPF description of what these would be called. And these areas are basically regions of the internet that you kind of think of as operating somewhat independently. And so how does this work? Let's think about area 0, because area 0 is kind of this backbone here. What's going to happen is the stuff in area, well, let's talk about area 1 first. The stuff in area 1, we can figure out how to route things among these networks all in area 1, and R1 knows all about it. And so R1 has a forwarding table for all the networks and routers that exist in area 1. And then what it's going to do is collect all that information and then act like it has individual links to all of these networks and send that information to area 0. So now when area 0 is thinking about delivering something, say, to this network over here in this blue line, then it knows that it needs to dump it off into R1. And that's all it needs to know. It doesn't need to know the full path of the internet over here to area 1. And what that's done is it's shrinked the width of my internet quite drastically. And in specific, if I'm running kind of RIP or OSPF here, I only have to think about the internet as if it exists of these 3 routers. I don't have to think of the internet as existing of all, 9 of these. I can just think of the internet existing as these 3 routers. R1 collects all this information over here, and when it's submitting things to area 0, it only has to submit the information from area 1 as if R1 is directly connected to it. And this is pretty amazing, because this allows me to break the internet up into pieces such that I can route in a smaller region and still connect to the wider internet. That also means that these things could kind of be autonomously programmed units, as long as we have some protocols kind of sitting in between our interconnection here. So a lot of times what you consider these regions to be are autonomous systems, and you'll see them described as AS in your book. And so this is just another picture of that, where everything that's routed in here is kind of autonomous system 1, everything that's routed in here is autonomous system 2, and then it's clear that R2 and R4 will communicate kind of everything that R2 can touch. It will communicate to R4, and R4 can communicate everything that R4 can touch to R2. There is some more going on here, and there's a lot more that we have to think about. And in specific, when you think about those autonomous regions, there are different types. There are kind of endpoints, there are backbones, and then there's things that are kind of regionally interconnecting things. And there can be some interconnections here. So like AS2 and AS3 could be directly connected. And this makes things a little more complicated. What customer R cares about for its routing is much different than what the backbone cares about for its routing. And they do all have to kind of agree and communicate with each other. It turns out that A lot of these things are globally coordinated once we get up to BGP, or this border gateway protocol. And this is a tree structure here. It doesn't have to be a tree. BGP will figure that out and sort that out, because it knows an entire picture of the internet. But you can imagine, I can collectively route through AS3, and I can decide, if AS6 sends me some stuff that's meant for AS4, and I have a link between AS2 and AS3, I can decide whether it's better to send that through AS1 or through AS2, based on like normal routing protocol stuffs. But I only make those decisions at the border points of my network. I don't have to make them throughout my entire network. My entire network routes between itself as it would, and then I make these decisions here. And there are lots of other decisions that happen. Like maybe I have to pay to send things over the backbone, and so me and AS2 form a peer-to-peer network to avoid using a paid backbone or something. And so there's a lot of economics involved here. But largely you're talking about the same routing stuff that we've been doing, except we're kind of obscuring or abstracting away some of the details, right? For B to know that it needs to send something over here to this subnet 192.12.6.9, which might belong to some ISP, which then gives you your internet. For B to know that it's supposed to send it there, it doesn't need to know what all that interconnection is. It doesn't need to know all the homes that are connected to customer R. All it needs to know is that all the addresses that R deals with are over here, and it can send them that way. And that's simple, right? That's scalable, and that's really neat. Again, this is another picture of perhaps that method, and sometimes we talk a little bit more about what that might specifically look like. But one particular autonomous system, only has to view the internet as this bubble, and then it can have policy decisions about where to send traffic. Maybe it says, hey, me and whoever's connected to E have this peer-to-peer network, so we send traffic to each other freely, but maybe I have to pay to send them out over here to A. So only send them over to A if that's the only way you can get to that connection. Maybe there's only one connection to some remote site, and so you have to pay to use that link. That's the gist. I guess one other thing that I think I would like to talk about is briefly, I'd like to talk about IPv6. IPv6 is the upgrade to IPs that we've been using already. And I guess there's three main things that I would like to talk about. One is that the address space is drastically huger. And we did talk about this at one point in time. Instead of using 32 bits for the address, and like we do in IPv4, IPv6 uses 128 bits. That means there are undecillion numbers of new addresses available. There's no more need for private networks or network address translation or anything like that. It is every single device connected to the internet will have its own unique IPv6 address, which is amazing. But IPv6 comes with a host of other cool upgrades and features. And yes, this is kind of separate from routing, but it is tucked kind of after BGP in the book, so we're talking about it here. And some of those amazing features include support for source routing built into the protocol, which is super cool. You can define your path through the internet, which could layer in some support for things like VPNs and stuff like that. No more DHCP servers. So IPv6 has the ability to auto-configure kind of built into it. Each host has to know how to do this stuff. So IPv6 is something we should be looking at, thinking about, and moving towards, to kind of get rid of some of these hacks and stuff like that. There is a lot of research that needs to be done to help keep us safe in both environments still, as always, because it's ever evolving. But that's where we're at. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop it there. As always, take care of yourselves and take care of each other, and I'll see you all next time.